Ma'am, step away from the vehicle now.
This is my garage, Unit 3B. I'm unloading groceries.
Caller says you don't match the resident.
The garage door was halfway down when the voice cut through the concrete space. Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Now. The words didn't echo loudly. They didn't need to. They landed heavy. Sharp. Final. She froze with one hand still inside the open trunk. A paper grocery bag rustled softly as the motor above her head continued its slow, mechanical hum. Fluorescent lights flickered once, then steadied, casting a harsh white glow across bare cement walls. The smell of oil, dust, and warm metal hung in the air. "This is my garage," she said calmly. "I'm unloading my car." Two police officers stood at the entrance. One aimed a flashlight directly at her face, the beam blinding. Unmoving. The other rested his hand near his holster. Not touching it, but close enough to send a message. Their radios crackled faintly, a low static rhythm that made the silence feel heavier. "We received a report of a suspicious person," the taller officer said. "You don't match the resident description." She slowly pulled her hand from the trunk. Keys dangled from her fingers, catching the light. Her posture remained straight, controlled, almost rehearsed. "I live here," she replied. "Unit 3B. My name is on the lease." The flashlight dropped from her face to her jacket, her jeans, her hair pulled tightly back, then to the trunk, filled with grocery bags. "Then why are you parked in this spot?" the second officer asked. "Because it's assigned to me," she said. The taller officer took a step closer. His boots scraped against the concrete. The sound loud in the enclosed space. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle and show me some identification." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, not anger. Calculation. "Am I being detained?" she asked evenly. "Or am I free to finish unloading my groceries?" The officers exchanged a brief glance. The garage suddenly felt smaller. Toy can adjust language if needed. "You're being investigated," the taller officer said. "So yes, you're being detained." The hum of the garage door continued overhead, and in that moment, standing in her own garage, doing nothing wrong, the line between resident and suspect quietly disappeared. "Investigated for what?" she asked, her voice steady. "For standing in my own garage?" Neither officer answered right away. The flashlight stayed fixed on her chest now, not her face. The beam felt deliberate, like a boundary she wasn't meant to cross. Somewhere above them, a car door slammed. Footsteps echoed briefly across concrete, then faded. Someone else was home now. A witness, even if they didn't know it yet. "Ma'am, don't make this difficult," the second officer said. "We're just trying to figure out why you're here." She exhaled slowly through her nose, the keys in her hand pressed into her palm. "I'm here because I live here," she replied, "and because I have every legal right to stand in this garage without being treated like a suspect." The taller officer's jaw tightened. His radio chirped again. He ignored it. "You don't need to lecture us on the law," he said. "Turn around. Hands where I can see them." The words weren't shouted. They didn't have to be. Authority didn't raise its voice when it expected obedience. Her heart rate stayed even. Her shoulders remained back. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. "Before I do that," she said carefully, "I need to understand why I'm being detained when there's been no allegation of a crime." The officers exchanged another glance. This one lasted longer. "You're escalating this," the second officer said. "We're just doing our jobs." "No," she replied. "You escalated when you assumed I didn't belong here." The sentence landed clean, precise, and uncomfortable. The garage felt tighter now. The walls seemed closer. The hum of the fluorescent lights sounded louder, harsher. Another door opened somewhere on the level above them. A woman's voice drifted briefly into the space, then disappeared. The taller officer stepped closer again. "This is your last warning," he said. "Turn around." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. "If I reach into my bag," she said clearly, "it's to get my wallet." The flashlight followed her movement, the beam trembling just slightly. At the far end of the garage, a phone lifted into view. Someone was recording, and with that quiet, glowing red dot, what had already gone wrong began moving toward something far more serious. The phone camera at the far end of the garage didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence alone changed the air. The garage door above her continued its slow descent, the motor whining as metal slid against its track. The sound filled the space, pressing down, sealing the moment in. When the door finally closed with a dull, heavy thud, the outside world disappeared. Now there were only the lights, the officers, and the woman standing still beside her car. "I'm not resisting," she said calmly, her hands visible at her sides. "I'm asking a lawful question." The taller officer didn't respond. He took another step forward, close enough now that she could smell stale coffee on his breath. His flashlight dropped. No longer needed. Control had already shifted. "You don't get to decide what's lawful here," he said. "We do." Somewhere above them, a voice called out, "What's going on down there?" "Police business." The officer snapped without looking up. "Please step back." No one stepped back. Another phone appeared at the railing above. Then another. The red recording lights glowed like quiet witnesses. She glanced toward them briefly, then back at the officers. "For the record," she said evenly, "I am standing in my assigned garage space. I have identified myself as a resident. I have not committed a crime." The second officer shifted his weight. His eyes flicked toward the growing audience. He swallowed. "We should just verify her ID." He muttered. The taller officer didn't acknowledge him. "This ends now," he said. "Turn around." She didn't move. Not because she couldn't, but because she understood exactly what this moment meant. "If you put your hands on me," she said quietly, "you are crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed." Her voice wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. For half a second, no one moved. Then the officer reached for her arm. And in that instant, under flickering lights, surrounded by concrete and cameras, the situation stopped being a misunderstanding. It became a decision. His fingers closed around her wrist. Not fast. Not violent. Deliberate. The grip was firm. Possessive, the kind meant to signal authority without needing words. "I am not resisting," she said immediately. Her voice stayed level. Clear enough for every camera in the garage to hear. Clear enough for every witness above. The officer pulled her arm behind her back anyway. The sound of metal cut through the space. A sharp click. Then another. The handcuffs locked into place with a final mechanical snap that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. The fluorescent light above buzzed loudly now. Or maybe it always had. It was hard to tell. She closed her eyes for half a second. Not in fear. In recognition, this was the moment. The cuffs bit into her wrists too tight. Deliberately so. She shifted slightly, testing the pressure. They didn't give. "You're being detained pending investigation," the officer said. "Detained for what crime?" she asked. No answer. From above, a voice broke the silence. "She said she lives here." Another followed. "This is wrong." The officer ignored them. He guided her forward, one hand gripping her arm, steering her away from the open trunk where grocery bags still sat untouched. Each step echoed off the concrete, loud and slow, as if the garage itself were counting them. As they moved, she turned her head slightly toward the phones. "Please keep recording," she said calmly. "Everything." The officers didn't stop her. The patrol car waited at the end of the garage, its rear door already open. The hard plastic seat caught the light as she was guided inside. She sat carefully, shoulders straight, wrists locked in steel. The door closed with a hollow thud. Inside the car, it was quiet. No radio chatter, no voices. Just the low hum of the engine and the muffled sound of people talking outside. In the front seat, the officer stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Behind him, she watched her reflection flicker faintly in the window glass. Calm face, controlled breathing, hands in cuffs. Her mind was already moving forward, organizing facts, marking time, building a record, because whatever this was now, she knew one thing with certainty. This night was no longer just about her. The patrol car rolled forward, tires humming softly against the concrete as it exited the garage. The lights above flickered past the windows in steady intervals. Andrea watched them slide across the glass like a countdown. She didn't panic. She didn't plead. She didn't rehearse excuses. She focused on details. The tightness of the cuffs, the rhythm of her breathing, the time. Because this was not her first encounter with pressure. Andrea Collins was 46 years old. She had spent more than 2 decades in rooms where the stakes were higher than this rooms where a single sentence could decide a career, a verdict, or the direction of a federal investigation. She grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. Her mother taught public school. Her father drove a city bus. Long hours, little margin for error. They taught her early that rules mattered, but understanding who enforced them mattered just as much. Andrea learned how to stay still when adults raised their voices, how to listen without reacting, how to respond with precision instead of emotion. Those lessons followed her through college, through law school, through clerkships where she was often the only black woman in the room and always the most prepared. She didn't survive by being loud. She survived by being exact. At 31, Andrea joined the Department of Justice. Not a ceremonial role, not a desk job buried in paperwork. She joined the Civil Rights Division, the part of the DOJ that investigates misconduct, the part that cities fear. For years, she studied patterns just like the one unfolding around her now. Unlawful stops, escalations fueled by assumption, reports written to justify decisions made in seconds. As the patrol car turned onto the street, Andrea leaned back against the hard plastic seat, wrists still locked in steel. She knew this pattern. She had prosecuted it. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the officers in the front seat had no idea who they had just put in handcuffs. Not yet. Andrea joined the Department of Justice at 31 years old, not in a ceremonial role, not behind a desk pushing paper. She joined the Civil Rights Division, the part of the DOJ that investigates police misconduct, the part that cities quietly dread. For more than 15 years, Andrea worked cases involving unlawful searches, false arrests, excessive force, and systemic discrimination. She didn't chase headlines. She chased patterns, small decisions that added up to constitutional violations, stops that escalated because someone didn't seem right, detentions justified after the fact. She had sat across from police chiefs who insisted their officers followed procedure, from union lawyers who called misconduct a misunderstanding, from city attorneys who hoped time would bury the evidence. Andrea didn't argue emotionally. She laid out timelines, body camera footage, radio logs, internal emails that contradicted official reports line by line. She helped negotiate consent decrees that forced departments to change how they trained, how they reported, how they disciplined. She helped remove officers who had accumulated complaints but remained protected by silence and paperwork. Families remembered her because she listened. Departments remembered her because she didn't forget. Inside the DOJ, Andrea was known for being unshakable, soft-spoken, meticulous. When she asked questions, people answered carefully. She had helped write the very policies that governed stops, detentions, and use of force, the same rules now being ignored in real time as she sat in the back of a patrol car. That irony hung heavy in the silence, because the officers driving her to the station believed they were in control. They believed this was a routine detention, a minor inconvenience, something that would resolve itself once they sorted it out. They didn't realize they were transporting a woman who had spent her career documenting moments exactly like this. Moments that didn't end quietly, moments that followed people home, and moments that changed careers. Officer Ryan Keller had been on the force for 9 years. On paper, his record looked solid. Consistent performance reviews. No major disciplinary actions. No suspensions. No headlines. But buried deeper in his file was something harder to measure. A pattern. Stops that escalated faster than necessary. Reports filled with vague language. Subject appeared nervous. Did not seem to belong. Refused to cooperate. Complaints that never quite stuck. Not enough evidence. Not enough witnesses. Not enough to trigger discipline. Nothing that forced accountability. Officer Mark Ellison sat in the passenger seat. 4 years on patrol. Ambitious. Careful. The kind of officer who learned quickly when to speak and when to stay quiet. He had learned early that backing your partner mattered more than questioning decisions, especially in front of civilians. The call that brought them to the garage had been brief. Suspicious individual. Black female. Garage area. Caller unsure if resident. No report of a crime. No forced entry. No theft. Just suspicion. By the time Keller stepped into the garage, his mind had already filled in the blanks. Someone out of place. Someone who didn't match expectations. Someone to control before asking questions. That framing never changed. When Andrea explained she lived there, it became defiance. When she asked if she was detained, it became resistance. When witnesses appeared, it became a challenge. Ellison had felt it shift. He had seen the phones, heard the tone change. He had even suggested verifying her ID. But Keller didn't hear it. Because once authority commits to a narrative, reassessing feels like losing control. And losing control, especially in front of witnesses, was unacceptable. As the patrol car approached the station, Keller replayed the moment she warned him. If you put me in cuffs, you are making a decision that will follow you for the rest of your career. It hadn't sounded like a threat. It had sounded like certainty. Keller tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Ellison stared straight ahead. Neither of them spoke. And neither of them yet understood just how real that warning was about to become. The patrol car rolled into the station lot just after 8:47 p.m. Keller parked, shut off the engine and sat there, for a moment longer than necessary. No one moved. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the concrete walls of the garage. Andrea watched the reflection of the station lights ripple across the windshield. She counted the seconds by the steady tick of the cooling engine. 1 to 2, 3. Finally, Ellison opened his door. Andrea stepped out carefully. The cuffs pulled against her wrists as she straightened. But her posture didn't change. Shoulders back, chin level, composed. Inside the station, the air smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Phones rang. A printer whirred. Someone laughed near the break room. Normal life. They walked her past the front desk. The desk sergeant looked up, his eyes flicking immediately to the handcuffs. "What do we have?" he asked. "Suspicious person," Keller said, refused to cooperate. Andrea turned her head slightly. "That is false," she said calmly. "I complied at every step." The sergeant paused. He looked at her, not just her clothes, but her posture, her stillness, her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Andrea Collins." "Date of birth?" She answered without hesitation. Ellison handed over her driver's license. The sergeant took it and began typing. The room changed. The tapping slowed, then stopped. The sergeant leaned closer to the screen, then closer again. His brow furrowed. He glanced up at Andrea, then back down. Keller felt it before he saw it. The subtle shift in posture, the tightening around the sergeant's eyes. "Hold on," the sergeant said quietly. He stood up and walked toward the back office. The door closed behind him. Andrea remained still. Keller stared straight ahead now, avoiding her gaze for the first time since the garage. Ellison swallowed. Something was happening, and whatever it wasn't going to end the way Keller had expected. The back office door opened. A lieutenant stepped out. Gray hair, calm movements, the kind of presence that comes from years of learning the cost of mistakes. He held Andrea's license in his hand, but his eyes were on her face. "Miss Collins," he said evenly. Andrea met his gaze. "Yes." "Can you confirm your current employer?" The question landed softly, but it changed the temperature of the room. "The Department of Justice." Andrea replied, "Civil Rights Division." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The dangerous kind. Ellison's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Keller blinked once, then again. For the first time that night, his confidence fractured. The lieutenant nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "Washington-based," he said, "high-ranking attorney." Andrea didn't smile. "I asked multiple times to verify my identity," she said calmly. "You chose not to." The lieutenant turned his head toward Keller. "Is that true?" Keller swallowed. "Yes," he said, his voice barely audible. The lieutenant exhaled controlled. "Heavy. Take the cuffs off," he said. Ellison moved immediately. His hands shook as he unlocked the metal. The cuffs fell away, clattering softly onto the desk. Andrea flexed her wrists. Red marks circled the skin. The lieutenant met her eyes. "Miss Collins," he said, "on behalf of this department, I apologize." Andrea nodded once. "I want all body camera footage," she said. "Every angle. The radio logs, the call recording, and the incident report." "You'll have them," the lieutenant replied. "Tonight." Keller stood frozen. Every second replayed in his mind the warning. The cameras. The moment he reached for her arm, Andrea picked up her purse. "This didn't have to happen," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out. Behind her, the room remained silent, because everyone inside now understood the same thing. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Andrea didn't say another word as she walked out of the station. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. By the time she reached home, her phone was vibrating non-stop. Messages from colleagues, missed calls from supervisors, one short text from a neighbor she didn't know personally. "I posted the video. I'm sorry this happened to you." The footage went live just before midnight. No commentary. No music. Just raw video. A woman standing in her own garage. Calm. Composed. Explaining. Officers escalating. Ignoring. Grabbing. Cuffing. By morning, it was everywhere. Local news picked it up first. Then national outlets. Then legal analysts. Civil rights attorneys paused the footage frame by frame, pointing out the moment reasonable suspicion never existed and never appeared. Comment sections exploded. This could have been anyone. She did everything right. This is textbook unlawful detention. Inside the department, panic set in. Supervisors demanded reports. Internal Affairs opened a review before breakfast. Body camera footage was pulled, duplicated, archived. Radio logs were flagged. The original call was re-examined. Suspicious person. That was all it had ever been. Both officers were placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. Keller surrendered his badge. His service weapon was logged into evidence. Ellison was reassigned pending investigation, but the department understood something deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding they could explain away. This was on camera. And the woman in that video wasn't just any civilian. She was someone who knew exactly what came next. Andrea waited. She documented everything timestamps. Statements. Footage. Silence. She didn't rush. She didn't speak publicly. She let the record build itself, because when the story finally moved to court, it wouldn't be framed by outrage. It would be framed by facts. And facts, she knew, were unforgiving. The lawsuit was filed before the end of the week. Federal court. Civil rights violations. Unlawful detention. False arrest. Violation of Fourth Amendment protections. Equal protection violations. The defendants were named clearly. Officer Ryan Keller. Officer Mark Ellison. The city. The police department. The complaint didn't rely on emotion. It didn't need to. It cited timestamps, body camera footage, radio transmissions, training manuals that contradicted Keller's actions line by line. Internal Affairs widened its investigation almost immediately. Keller's past stops were reopened. Old complaints once dismissed were pulled back into the light. Residents were contacted again. This time, their statements were read carefully. Patterns that once seemed isolated now formed a clear line. Ellison cooperated fully. He admitted he had felt the stop go wrong, admitted he had hesitated, admitted he deferred to his senior officer instead of intervening. That admission didn't erase his role, but it mattered. The city attorney reviewed the case and reached the same conclusion Andrea had reached the moment the cuffs clicked shut. This was indefensible. Settlement talks began before depositions even started. The city moved quickly, not out of remorse, but out of damage control. The final number was never officially announced. Sources close to the negotiations described it as substantial, large enough to require city council approval, large enough to trigger mandatory policy review. 6 weeks later, Officer Keller was terminated. The letter cited violations of constitutional rights, failure to de-escalate, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His appeal was denied. Ellison received disciplinary action and mandatory retraining. His career continued, but under scrutiny that would never fully disappear. Press conferences were held. Statements were released. Policies were revised. But none of it could undo what had already been exposed. Because the footage didn't just show a bad stop. It showed how easily the system chose control over correction, and how rarely that choice faced consequences until now. Andrea Collins returned to work the following Monday. Not to applause, not to interviews, to conference rooms, case files, policy drafts marked with red ink. She sat on the other side of incidents that now felt uncomfortably familiar. When colleagues asked how she was holding up, she gave the same answer every time. "I documented everything," she said, "just like I always do." What happened in that garage was not complicated. Under the Fourth Amendment, police officers are required to have reasonable suspicion supported by specific and articulable facts before detaining a person. Standing in your own garage, unloading groceries, does not meet that standard. It never has. A vague call about a suspicious person is not a blank check. Officers are trained that suspicion must be tied to behavior, not appearance. Not race. Not assumptions about who looks like they belong. In Andrea Collins's case, the officers had multiple opportunities to correct course. She explained, she offered documentation, she remained calm. She asked lawful questions. None of that mattered once bias filled in the gaps. That is how constitutional violations usually happen. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with quiet confidence in the wrong conclusion. Psychologically, the pattern is familiar. Once authority commits to a narrative, every new piece of information is filtered to support it. Calm becomes defiance. Knowledge becomes threat. Witnesses become pressure. For the public, there are lessons here that matter. If you are confronted by police, remain calm. Speak clearly. Ask whether you are being detained. Do not consent to searches without a warrant or probable cause. Document everything or make sure someone else is. Know that asserting your rights is not a crime, even if it is treated like one in the moment. Andrea Collins knew the law. She knew the process. Most people do not. That disparity is where harm lives. This story resonates because it exposes a truth many experience but few see acknowledged. Respectability does not shield you from bias. Credentials do not guarantee protection. Doing everything right does not always stop escalation. Accountability arrived here because there was video, witnesses, and a woman who knew how to navigate a system designed to exhaust people into silence. So, the final question is not whether the officers made a mistake. They did. The real question is how many similar mistakes go unrecorded. How many garages? How many stops? How many people without cameras? Without legal knowledge? Without a safety net? If this story made you uncomfortable, it should have. Because justice does not begin in courtrooms. It begins with recognizing how easily it can be denied.